So when you think about the American Revolution, I bet you picture, the big battles, right? Lexington, Saratoga, Yorktown.
The famous ones, yeah. But the thing is, the true turning point, the ultimate test of survival, wasn't really a battle fought with guns.
It was a struggle against hunger, cold, and just despair. And it all happened in this one miserable place in Pennsylvania called Valley Forge.
Exactly. For 6 brutal months, the Continental Army faced enemies that were way worse than the British.
So today, we're going to look at how they survived that, and maybe more importantly, how they completely transformed themselves.
Yeah, from this group of exhausted ragtag survivors into a real professional fighting force.
Okay, so let's start with the place itself. Why Valley Forge? It's about 20 miles from Philadelphia. It sounds like the last place you'd want to spend a winter.
Well, it was chosen out of pure military necessity, definitely not for comfort. Washington had just lost Philadelphia to the British.
Right, so he needed a secure spot.
It's a secure place to rest, to reorganize, and to just protect his men. Valley Forge was defensible. It was on high, wooded ground.
So it gave them an advantage.
It did. It let Washington keep an eye on the British without, risking a surprise attack.
And this is so important. This wasn't some existing fort.
No, not at all. You have to get that picture out of your head. Valley Forge wasn't a stone fort. It was nothing. It was empty forest when they arrived.
So they were basically building an entire city from scratch.
A temporary winter city.
Okay, let's just get into that. They show up in December. It's freezing. They're exhausted, and there's nowhere to sleep. Survival means building fast.
The scale of that is it's staggering, especially when you remember they only had axes and saws, no modern equipment at all.
And shelter for over 10,000 soldiers.
10,000 men who had to become instant carpenters in the freezing cold.
So how did they even organize that?
They broke up into small teams. Each group of 12 men was responsible for building one log cabin.
And these cabins were tiny, right?
Oh, incredibly small. Maybe 14 by 16 feet.
To give you some perspective, imagine cramming 12 people and all their gear into a small bedroom and living there for 6 months.
That is unbelievably cramped. And what were the conditions actually like inside them?
Rough. I mean, really rough. They had dirt floors, a stone fireplace, and they'd fill the gaps between the logs with mud and clay to block the wind.
Did that even work?
Sort of.
Yeah.
But the chimneys often vented poorly, so the cabins were always dark, cramped, and just filled with this thick, stinging smoke.
And yet this effort turned a quiet forest into what was, at the time, the 4th largest city in the colonies.
It's an incredible logistical feat, yeah. All driven by the simple need to just survive that first week.
But once they had that basic shelter, they faced an even bigger problem. The whole support system just vanished.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because these supply failures were more deadly than any British cannon. The army lacked everything.
You hear stories about the clothes, the shoes. Many men had no shirts, no warm blankets. Their clothes were just rags. And the shoe situation was devastating. They just wore out on the frozen ground.
So they were wrapping their feet in rags.
In bloody rags, just to stand guard in the snow. I mean, think about that constant crippling pain.
And if you don't have clothes or shoes, you definitely don't have food. What happened there?
The supply system run by the Continental Congress had totally collapsed. And you have to remember, the Congress was this fragile new government. It had almost no power to tax.
So no money to buy supplies.
Well, they had paper money, but nobody trusted it. And this is the brutal irony. Local farmers would rather sell their crops to the British in Philadelphia.
Who paid in gold.
So the men fighting for liberty were starving while food was being sold to their enemy just down the road.
Which makes the fact that anyone stayed just incredible.
Yeah.
So at the absolute worst point, what were the soldiers actually eating?
They survived on something called fire cake.
Fire cake? What is that?
It's as bad as it sounds. It was just a simple paste of flour and water. They'd mix it together and bake it on a hot stone over a fire.
Just flour and water, no salt, nothing.
Nothing. It was bland, hard as a rock, and that was it. Day after day. Meat was a luxury they almost never saw. Sometimes they'd get shipments of salted fish, but it was often spoiled by the time it arrived.
Less like food and more like a punishment.
It wore them down just as much as the cold did.
So if starvation didn't get you, disease probably would. This is where the camp goes from miserable to truly deadly.
Absolutely. You pack 10,000 cold, starving men into tiny, smoky cabins with bad sanitation. Sickness is going to spread like wildfire.
What were the main threats?
2 big ones. Typhus, which is spread by lice and filth, And the real killer, smallpox.
And smallpox was terrifying back then. It could wipe out entire armies.
It could. And this is where we see Washington being incredibly forward-thinking. He ordered a secret mass inoculation program for the entire army.
Inoculation. That was brand new technology at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And really risky.
It was revolutionary and, yes, extremely dangerous. They would scratch a tiny amount of live smallpox into a person's skin to cause a mild infection and build immunity.
But it could also just kill them.
It could. If the dose was wrong or if the soldier was already too weak, the procedure itself was fatal. Washington was literally risking his entire army on this.
But he knew smallpox would get them anyway if he did nothing.
Exactly. It was this huge calculated risk that, in the end, saved the army. But even so, the cost of that winter was just immense.
How many men died?
Nearly 2,000 soldiers died, not from battle, but from disease and the cold. That's more men than were killed in most of the actual fights against the British.
2,000. That's a staggering loss.
Yeah.
How did the army not just completely fall apart?
That's the key question, isn't it? And while a lot of men did desert, they were starving and worried about their families, the amazing thing is that most of them stayed.
Why? Why would you stay?
I think it comes down to two things: leadership and the ideal they were fighting for. Washington stayed right there with them.
He didn't go back to some warm city for the winter.
No, he was in a small stone house, his headquarters, sharing their hardship. He would walk through the camp all the time, checking on the men. His presence was crucial.
And that shared suffering must have created a bond.
A deep, unbreakable bond. They were loyal to him, but also to the cause of liberty itself.
Okay, so loyalty keeps them together. But loyalty alone doesn't win battles. They needed professional training, which brings us to this unlikely hero who shows up, Baron von Steuben.
Right. Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer who arrives midwinter. He spoke very little English, which was a bit of a problem.
A bit of a problem. I'd say that's a huge hurdle.
It was, but he was an absolute expert in military drills and, really importantly, how to use a bayonet.
So you have this German officer yelling at American farmers in the snow.
Pretty much. He was famous for his temper. He'd be shouting these elaborate quizzes in German, and he had to have an aide translate his furious instructions into English for the men.
That must have been a sight.
It must have been. But it worked. Before he arrived, the army was just a collection of individuals. He taught them to march in formation, to move as one unit, to load their muskets efficiently.
And he turned the bayonet into a real weapon for them.
Exactly. He taught them it wasn't just a knife on the end of a gun. He was so effective, he ended up writing the Army's first standard training manual.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was used for decades. He took this ragtag group of survivors and, in the middle of all that suffering, forged them into a disciplined, professional fighting force.
And we should also talk about the people who are often left out of this story, the women at Valley Forge.
Their role was absolutely vital. They were the support system when the official one failed. Wives, sisters of soldiers. They traveled with the army.
What were they doing?
Everything. They worked as seamstresses, constantly mending torn uniforms. They were laundresses, which was critical for sanitation and preventing disease. And they served as nurses, caring for the sick and dying in the hospitals.
Martha Washington was there too, right?
She was. She organized sewing circles, trying to bring some small sense of normalcy and home to the camp. Honestly, the army would have fallen apart much faster without them.
So the story starts with incredible suffering, but then there's a turning point. Things start to get better.
They do. In the spring of 1778, the snow finally melts, the roads clear up. And that was huge.
Because supply wagons could finally get through.
Exactly. For the first time in months, real food started arriving. Fresh meat, vegetables. You can just imagine the change in morale.
It must have been like night and day.
Completely. The mood went from despair to hope. Soldiers were outside. They were healthy enough to really practice the drills von Steuben had taught them. They were getting ready for the next campaign.
And then in May, some huge news arrives. A political victory that changes everything.
The best news they could have possibly gotten. Word arrived that the United States had signed a formal treaty of alliance with France.
And what did that mean for the average soldier who just survived on fire cake?
It meant everything. It meant they were no longer fighting the British Empire alone. France was a global power.
And it meant money and supplies.
Yes. Ships, soldiers, money, and high-quality equipment that they desperately needed. It legitimized their entire cause on the world stage.
The celebration must have been something else.
Oh, it was huge. A grand parade, cannon fire. It gave them this immense boost of confidence. They finally knew they had a real chance to win.
So in June of 1778, when they finally marched away from Valley Forge, they weren't the same men who had stumbled in 6 months earlier.
Not even close. They left behind the graves of 2,000 comrades, but they also left behind their old selves. The army that marched out was professional, disciplined, and unified.
They were no longer just survivors.
They were an army ready to face the British head on.
And that really is the legacy of Valley Forge, isn't it? It wasn't a battle won with guns, but it was the crucible that forged the army that could win the war.
It proved that their commitment to an ideal to liberty could be stronger than any physical suffering.
So here's a final thought. If the Continental Army had just given up and dissolved at Valley Forge, would the Declaration of Independence just be another forgotten historical document today?